Welcome to video lecture 8 in this course on St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching on the problem of the one and the many, or on the nature of the one and the many in this course on metaphysics, the study of St. Thomas's metaphysical teaching. In video lecture 8, we are going to cover some of the same issues that we covered in video lecture 7, talking about the connection between St. Thomas's teaching on virtual quantity and being a measure, and also about the way in which these notions are connected to analogous predication. Right. Like video lecture 7, there are 6 topics of consideration in video lecture 8, and as a segue into them, once again, I'm going to do a review of this topic on measure, which is a very interesting one, and is a bit difficult to understand, but to the extent that we connect it to this problem of virtual quantity and to contrary opposition, privation and possession of unity, it becomes easier to understand, and it's nothing really incomprehensible. It's a measure is simply a limit. It's a modality of unity, a way of being one, and we're going to consider it in a little bit more detail. But if you remember that, it's simple. It's simply a way of considering a two, of understanding a two to be a one when you're talking about mentally measuring, and it's in a sense of being put into an order by boundaries, by limits in the thing. So a thing is measured to the extent that it is its unity and its way of existing is placed within boundaries and limits. That's precisely why we can know a thing by means of measuring it. That measuring is a kind of knowing, because the only things that we can know are things that we put within limits. There's no other way for the human mind to know things, and to limit a thing is to make it in some way one. The only way that we can limit a multitude is and make it one is by ordering it. To measure a thing in a way is to organize it, to consider it once again as an organization, and to identify the kind of organization that it is. Just a reconsideration of those 6 topics that we talked about the other day. One was about the problem of the one and the many, and being a measure, and how principles are measures. Because principles are our starting points of being, becoming, or or knowing. They can be considered to be measures in all 3 senses. If you remember Protagoras' famous statement that man is the measure of all things, of things that are that they are, of things that are not that they are not. And in relationship to that, that would also mean of things that are true that they're true, of things that are false that they're false. What Protagoras is saying there, and what we would say in modern parlance a lot of times, is that the measure of truth is the person who judges. When we're saying who measures truth, or who's to say what truth is. What we're asking is, who's the judge? Who's the judge? And the reason for that is because in an act of judgment, where what we're doing is relating a plurality, a subject, and something said of the subject as either being one or not one, united or divided. So we're bringing this multitude under one understanding, and that's placing it within limits, measuring it, right? Or we're dividing it in one understanding. We're saying they're not connected, they're not united. In that sense, when we take a look at the act of measuring, we recognize that what we do in measuring is that we relate a one to another, and we know the one, the other, in relationship to the one. When you take a unit measure, for example, in mathematics, and like an inch or a foot or yard, and we say that for example, 3 feet is 1 yard. We take 1 yard to measure 3 feet. In this way, counting, which is a kind of measuring, is simply a way of knowing a multitude, this kind of multitude. Well, we do that whenever we judge. And what we're doing, in a way, is measuring the completeness of possession of unity, the wholeness of a multitude, or of an organization. And in doing that, in a way, what we're doing is we're measuring a kind of greatness, limits of divisibility and indivisibility. So we extend this notion of measure from first taking measures of physical things in sense reality, and then we extend this to other kinds of beings. And the reason that we can do this is, once again, because anything that we can think of in terms of a one, we can talk of in terms of analogy in relationship to complete or incomplete possession. That's why this notion of virtual quantity is actually contained in the notion, is presupposed. Our understanding of it is presupposed in our understanding of being a measure. And it's a qualitative kind of addition that we make to our understanding of a thing being one. When we start to talk about it as a being, as a measure, or as being measured, what we're saying is that it has a limited possession of something, of some act, or some unity. And to have the act, it has to have the unity. This is why I stress the notion that in measuring something, what we're doing is placing limitations on its unity. To think of some other examples related to this, a measure, as in limiting possession and privation, in a sense, is limiting a common principle, right? It's giving us a better understanding of it, and it's a measure. It's a limit of greatness, in a sense. It tells us the size of something, either dimensively, or that is. To think about this, the three dimensions that we commonly talk about of a geometrical body: length and width and depth. In a sense, what they involve is a possession of a type of greatness, of a kind of unity that has a magnitude to it. When we talk about not only the length but the width, or the depth of a body, starting from the point, and stretching the point out, we are giving that matter, that organization, that organized unity, a certain greatness that we then use to measure the greatness of something else. It has dimensive greatness, and we extend those analogously. Because we can extend the notion of unity, we extend the notion of these these dimensive terms, and we'll talk about something like a surface knowledge that a person has, not very deep, or that the person's character is not very deep, or that the length of their attention is not very great. We'll take lines that have lengths to measure movements, and then extend the dimensive characteristic to understand the greatness of something that is really qualitative. Measure, to some extent, always adding a quality of limitation, of possession, or wholeness to whatever is a receiver is receiving. I talked about, in addition to just the notion of measure, how the substance of a thing, right, and its intrinsic accidents, its properties, are measures, because they place limitations on the kind of unity that a thing has. Substantial unity is a stronger type of unity. It's a stronger measure than is quantitative unity, which is a stronger measure and a greater one than qualitative unity. And we use the terms sameness, similarity, sameness, equality, and similarity as measures. Also, we extend the notion of measure to them. So when we're talking about two things being the same, to some extent, what we're doing, not identically or exactly the same, because exact sameness means not sharing a common matter. We're not a multitude. It means that, like Manhattan and its boroughs is New York City. They're exactly the same. There's no opposition. There's no contrary opposition there. But when we're using the term sameness, we're talking about beings that belong, that are extremes in some way, or between extremes of differences within a genus. They share a common matter, or a common principle, a common cause, and they're unequally distributed as effects of that common cause. When we identify them as belonging to the same genus, we're giving them the same sort of unbreakability, an identical kind of unbreakability, or indivisibility, and a kind of greatness. We're making them different measures. Sameness is a different kind of measure. It's generically different than similarity, and which is generically different from equality. The reason for this is because there is the organization of which they are the intrinsic unities, and indicators of the kind of unity that they have have a kind of a qualitative greatness to them, and a virtual quantity magnitude, or that is different. And the reason for the greatness of the substantial unity, being one in substance, is a greater kind of unity than being accidentally one, even if you're an intrinsic property of to be essentially united. It constitutes a greater indivisibility, because when you are broken apart, when you break the essential union, you break the union of the accidental properties also. You can change a thing's shape, and it will still remain the same type of a thing that it is, or you can change its size, it'll still maintain its substantial unity. And so Aristotle's identifying, St. Thomas identifying different levels of possession of unity, which are different intrinsic measures. And so the measure of the substance is basically the most essential element by means of which you know its intrinsic accidents of quantity and quality. So to know the quality of a thing, you have to know its quantity. That it is, you have to refer it to the surface body. And its existence depends upon being in the surface. But those surface dimensions depend upon the unity of the substance, which is a greater unity. So you have a hierarchy of unity that exists that is indicative of different intrinsic powers of possession of a kind of internal strength and liberty. That independence of action from dependence upon external conditions, that the ancient Greek mind, or at least some philosophers within that culture, recognized, and St. Thomas recognized was present in there. And he also recognized that the hierarchy of the sciences is related to that. To a grasp of a kind of qualitative difference in the greatness, in the internal measures of indivisibility and organization that exist within in different materials that are subjects of interest and wonder. That distinguish one kind of a being from another. And it's important for a person to understand this. In fact, one of the questions which I dealt with in those topics last week that I did not go over in much detail was the extent to which the unity of the substance determines philosophical or scientific understanding. This has to do with professional responsibility. St. Thomas, in commenting on giving criticism of Averroes's teaching in his treatise on the unity of the intellect, according to Averroes, makes reference to a comment that Aristotle makes about the extent or the limits of understanding to which a scientist or a philosopher possesses by nature of the science. To what does the professional understanding of this philosopher say, who is a biologist? How does that understanding differ from the extent of understanding that makes a scientist or a philosopher a medical doctor? For example, when they're both studying human nerves, and St. Thomas points out, following Aristotle, that the medical doctor is understanding must extend. How far does it have to extend? What's the measure of it? He says it has to extend as far as relating this. Notice how when we measure things, we tend to relate one to another. We take this thing and we use it to know this other. He says it extends as far as relating the nerve in question, as an example, to life-giving properties. This is a health-related body, so that we don't understand the common matter of a thing unless we relate it to its end. The only way we can understand the nature of the subject that we're studying is by taking the principle, this life-giving principle, for example, and extending it to health. And then we put it in a genus, and we say, well, this now is its common matter, right? Just like understanding the nature of an apple tree to grow apples. Well, if we're thinking about this body, right, as a life-generating body, and we're looking at one of its parts and saying, well, this is, this generates life. Well, that's a subject of interest, both for the biologist and for the medical doctor. But the medical doctor's chief concern as medical, the genus that the medical doctor is studying, that subject of interest and wonder, is that nerve in as much as it's health generating, not in as much as it's life generating, because the biologist is chiefly considering this same matter, but according to its life generating properties. Its life generating organization now belongs to a different organization, and that's of a different interest to a medical doctor and a biologist, but they have a professional responsibility. In fact, this is the way we identify their professional responsibility, by knowing the subject to which they're understanding as claiming to possess this habit of mind that they have extends, right? So because the habit of mind exists in them, right, and is essentially related to that end, to this end or that end, that's as far as their understanding as a professional extends, and that's as far as their professional responsibility in a moral sense would extend. So see the implications of this, of not knowing the essential connection between an intrinsic principle of organization, like a genus, a whole, and the parts that make it what it is, and the relationship to an aim. If you don't know how to identify the subject matter of a science or of a philosophical discipline, you cannot identify professional responsibility. And if you cannot do that, how can you possibly expect to have institutions of higher education, for example? The implications of having the wrong understanding of philosophy, the wrong understanding of these metaphysical notions like being a measure, and the proper measures that we should be using in different disciplines, and how these relate to specific habits of mind, how not only the thing being studied, but the way that the aim of the study is a term of a relationship between a habit, how the habit's qualities of mind of the knower enter into an essential relationship with an activity, a cooperatively generated act that makes the habit itself a term of a generic relationship. Is something astounding. And notice that without that quality of mind, you can't understand the way the methods of the physician and the biologist differ, nor can you divide those disciplines adequately one from another. It's impossible. So if you don't have the correct psychology of the human person, that you can't possibly have the right understanding of science. And very often I talk about St. Thomas Aquinas being a theologian, not a philosopher, chiefly, although he understood better than anyone else before him or after him, I think, the nature of Greek philosophy as it had been achieved in the mind of Aristotle, at least. Nonetheless, St. Thomas had to change Aristotle's understanding of the human person through revelation in order to come up with an adequate understanding by means of which he could flush out a lot of the implications that Aristotle had about science that Aristotle did not see as clearly as I think St. Thomas did. But I've covered all of those 6 questions, or 6 topics that we covered the last week, or the last lecture. And now I want to go into and continue in a way this discussion of virtual quantity and the nature of virtual quantity. This again is something that I became aware of from my colleague at St. John's University, Father Charles Bonaventure Crowley, who worked for 50 years on this problem, and unhappily, toward the end of his life, he came down with spinal arthritis, and he was not able to complete his work and get it out to the general public, so he asked me to help him with it, and I had no interest whatsoever in physical science, I was interested in this problem of unity and multiplicity, the one and the many in the ancient Greeks. But Father Crowley had he was very disorganized. So, and he had this scholastic language that he used, and his own terminology, like some of the terminology I'm using here, like talking about virtual quantity, that even scholastics did not understand. So I did the best I could to try to comprehend what he was talking about and help edit some works for him, like the Aristotelian Thomistic philosophy of measure in the International System of Units, SI, where Father Crowley tries to show the metaphysical foundations of all of the principles that are used in the International System of Units. It's an absolute work of genius. I said at the time that I thought it was one of the greatest works of philosophical analysis in the 20th century, and he was embarrassed by this and didn't want me to say that because he thought people would think it was an exaggeration and it would ruin its ability to have people finally become aware of it. But I don't think that's the case. And I have 6 topics of discussion here in the in Lecture 8, and I'm just going to first talk about a couple of these first. And one is this relationship of virtual quantity and privation as the proximate and per se causes of the origin of species. That is, we talk a lot about species today, especially since the work of Charles Darwin, and I think Darwin saw some implications about the origin of species, that new species originate. St. Thomas knew that new species originate. And Darwin was actually going back to Aristotle to try to figure out mechanisms to try to explain how new species come to be. This origin of species really is not something the ancient Greeks would have thought much about, because they thought that the universe was everlasting. And so the notion that new species come into being that have never been before, that makes no sense to the ancient Greek because they always have been. Even though they recognized that there were anomalies in where species appeared to have disappeared because they found fossil records of them. Still, Darwin was basically examining the notion of species as a nominalist, and I don't want to get into a wide discussion of his thinking, aside from the fact that a big mistake that he made was to treat species as if they're races, and he got, I think, involved in a metaphysical problem that physicists and biologists can't really solve. He got himself involved in the problem of universals in a way, but extended now to biology. He thought he was a nominalist, and nominalists don't accept the notion of the existence of species, which Darwin didn't accept as far as universals. Species is a name for him of a multitude, of basically a race that is able to take over geographical region and drive other beings out from it. And he has some awareness of the fact that the notion of species is indicative of some principle internal to a being that gives it a kind of intrinsic independence from external conditions and circumstances, and that how even an individual depends upon the environment. But I don't think biologists or physicists can solve this problem. I think it's actually a metaphysical problem, and whether it is something that can be demonstrated or like the eternity of the universe is something that some people hold on faith and some people think can be proven one way or the other is a question. I personally think that it's not something that can be demonstrated one way or the other. But that being said, Darwin's problem in thinking about species in terms of races is that the origin of a race can't, if you think of it in terms of historical descent from original parents, parents can't be descended from themselves. So then the parents could never belong to the species, and you're involved in a kind of circular argument. So I think to some extent people have totally missed this, and Darwin's attempt to solve the problem. But from this metaphysical standpoint of an analysis of species, the origin of a species is a genus, and how a genus comes into being becomes the primary concern, and how members of one organization can, in a way, in relationship to different aims, change from one organization into another, and by doing that, generate a new species. But that's the crucial element that you have to focus attention on. That and in terms of virtual quantities and aims, Darwin, for example, did not deny the reality of aims or ends in things. He readily admitted it. This was Huxley, Aldous Huxley, and his brother, Thomas Huxley, I think it was his name, who promoted this notion that there is an evolutionary type of process, and it's aimless. I think more promise lies in understanding the nature of species and the way they work within the physical universe is the work that John Dealey is doing on semiosis, and thinking about the universe as a system of signs of interconnections, interconnected organizations. So anyway, it's in terms of the unequal possession, right, of a common matter, a common principle or cause. Once again, the matter being simply a cause or a principle that is unequally distributed, a unity, that is being unequally distributed through its power of possession, through unequal limit measures, or unequal limits or measures, that you have a diversity of species. A diversity of species is caused by a diversity of organizational unity. You have an organizational unity that is distributed throughout different internal divisions. And this can only be possible because of privation, unequal possession. Without the understanding of the notions of possession and privation and distribution, division, right, of a unity by means of a multitude of unequally independent, internally independent powers and strengths of distribution, you can't possibly start to talk about solving this problem of species and the way species relate to genus, or understand them for that matter. So if you reject the Aristotelian and Thomistic principle of privation and possession, you can't even enter the discussion intelligently about approaching how to understand the nature of species and how they're related to a genus. And so I think that this is something that we have to get back to, and it's one of the reasons why I bring this up. And also simply to go into an explanation of Father Crowley's teaching on virtual quantity, how according to him and according to Aristotle, you can check out the text of St. Thomas on there. There's a more basic division between continuous and discrete quantity in St. Thomas and Aristotle, which is virtual quantity, and dimensive quantity, between quantity virtutis and molus, bulk quantity. And the virtual quantity lies in what we today would call a kind of conductive concentration. It's an intensive possession, a wholeness or completeness of possession of act. St. Thomas calls it spiritual greatness, and he talks about this spiritual greatness in terms of the spiritual greatness in terms of ethics, for example, and in fact, it's related to the understanding of virtue, virtues, according to Aristotle and St. Thomas. Although they don't talk in this way, but I do. I've written an article about this. Are virtual quantities. They're types of spiritual greatness, and the magnitude of the greatness distinguishes its possessors on the basis of since the greater completeness is a kind of goodness and beauty, in a way. The virtues are indicative of the possession of a more beautiful type of activity, and the possessor, the soul of the possessor, being a more beautiful soul. Now, one of the reasons why I'm interested very much in this question of intensive quantity and its relationship to privation and possession is because it helps us to better to understand the nature of motion and change. It's an essential element of it, because it's by the imperfect possession of an act that a succession of before and after occurs within an activity, and there's a future succession that is is possible for a being in emotion. And the limits of possession, the measure of the possession, the intensity of possession of an act of existing is the way we make time intelligible to us in the sense of real time, not mathematical time, which is a measurement of different ways of placing geometrical and numerical analogies on our understanding of the extent of the existence of a movement, or the length of the existence of a movement. Time, from a metaphysical standpoint, indicates a kind of greatness of possession of existence. The kind of completeness with which it is held onto. And human beings don't hold on to it all at once whole. So like Boethius says in defining eternity, God has the simultaneous whole and perfect possession of unending life. That's his measure. And eternity, therefore, is the measure of God's existence, because it indicates how God possesses existence, the greatness of possession with which existence is held by the divine being, in contrast to eternity for angels, which is not as completely whole and perfect as God's, but not as imperfect and less whole as temporal beings. So, contrasting eternity, and time gives you a sense of St. Thomas's understanding of measure. It helps to increase it. This also is indicative of the importance that qualities play in the being able to hold on to existence. There are other areas that I want to go on to also about measure that I'm going to come back to, but I'm going to leave off now. The second lecture on St. Thomas's teaching regarding the one and the many, where I've been concentrating on the notions of virtual quantity and privation, and I'm going to talk right now about the connection between relation and action, and whether relation has to precede action, or whether action precedes relation. This is an interesting problem, because in Aristotle's categories he talks about substance, quantity, quality, relation, and then action after that, and so there's an order to the categories, and it would appear that in Aristotle's mind relation has to precede action. And I think the answer to this question, and one of the reasons I bring it up, I mentioned this, and I've been talking about privation and possession and measure, and the relationship of measure to privation and possession and virtual quantity, is because of the fact that a complete understanding of St. Thomas's notion of science and how he developed it in relationship to this problem of the one and the many requires that we cover all of these elements, because science involves a habit of reasoning, which involves making analogies, and analogous reasoning and analogous predication that I'm slowly building up your awareness about, depends upon the recognition of unequal possession of unity, which I've just related to to the notion of measurement, and how there's a kind of immaterial aspect to this, that unity is actually a principle of immateriality. And so there's a kind of an immaterial resistance within things that is more or less complete. That determines the hierarchy of genera and species. So as you increase the perfection of species, the greatness of species, what's increasing is a kind of an immaterial independence, or resistance to being affected and influenced by what goes on externally, and an increase in internal principles of generation of power, an increasing perfection of the internal being as a self-measure of one's actions. So without this understanding of virtual quantity, the question of species and genera can't be understood, and that can't be understood either without an understanding of privation, and how privation is a kind of negation or incompleteness in possession, in reception of an activity. Now, according to one of the principles that people often hear that scholastics use, is that a thing acts the way according to its nature. Agere secretaresse, acts are consequent upon the being of a thing. Esse being used in the sense of an ends, and the way an ends possesses. More or less completely the act of existing. How perfectly we exist determines how perfectly we are going to act, which means how perfect the measure is, how complete a measure of being, of existence we have, is going to determine how completely our actions are performed, or how much succession and external dependence is going to be involved in our operations. So now, what determines how much we receive of an action and a unity depends upon quality. And so virtual quantity is actually a quality, and all qualities have to do with conductive capacities in relationship to receiving or generating actions. The greater the conductive capacity, the greater the resistance to being influenced by other beings in our own operations, the greater is our independence as agents. And the more perfect we are, the more immaterial we are in our unity. So unity actually is based upon the notion of immateriality. Being deprived of pluralization, the less pluralized we are, the less material we are, the more immaterial we are, the greater we are in species, the greater kind of intensive quantum unity and organization that we have. As our organizational independence increases, so does our immateriality of possession, of action, and our freedom. And this is one of the reasons why so many people rightly identify freedom with immateriality and not being limited by material conditions, as did Darwin, for example. Privation actually is a principle of qualities. And the extent or the limit of privation is determined by the quality that is part of the virtual quantity, possession, there's a sense in which I think you might even say, or might properly be said, that quality is the principle of privation. That the quality of a subject determines how deprived or how possessed it is. But whatever the case, whether privation is the principle of quality or quality is the principle of privation, qualities, as far as I can see, are limits that exist within privation and possession. And what they do is they ground relations. So if relations are principles that are generated by qualities, then if privations are not real, then qualities are not real. If qualities are not real, relations are not real, and the ability to act or be acted upon depends upon the limits to which opposing beings can be joined together or united. Now, St. Thomas has a very famous teaching about the fact that existence precedes essence, that existence is the first principle of all action. It is a kind of activity, and so it has to precede relation. And metaphysically considered, this is true. But I'm not talking in terms of time here. Relation and existence coexist simultaneously. The time is a result of the being of a thing. Even time is consequent upon existence. Before existence, there is no time. It places a limitation on the possession of existence, but strictly speaking, the relation and unity and action coincide in an agent. Right? Now, the reason I've gone over this in talking about measure and virtual quantity is to again talk about the issue of analogy and analogous predication, because once you recognize that privation, and I think the proper way to say is privation is the ground of quality, is the principle of quality. It's a limit. Quality is a limit within the privation. So you're so much deprived, or so little deprived of a limit of existence, that the grounds for the analogy of being are established by means of which we engage in analogous predication in the sciences, because we recognize that there is an inequality in the way that we have to refer terms to subjects, the predicates that we say of subjects, to subjects based upon, as I talked about before in this lecture, about the way in which the substantial quality of the internal form or the accidental quality of the limits of quantitative possession, the dimensive greatness that a thing has, and its qualitative in the more common use of quality as an accident or property of a thing, or set of a thing. So what I'm doing is connecting the elements of measure and privation and the virtual quantity to that element of analogy to show that if without this understanding of virtual quantity, you can't understand a hierarchy of genera and species. Analogous predication is something we utilize to talk about inequality of causal activity, a certain type of superiority in causing and being acted upon by others, so that we can understand the internal type of organizational strength and organizational unity with which causes are generated. Okay, so if you don't understand St. Thomas's teaching on virtual quantity, you can't understand his teaching on opposition, on contrary opposition, on the apparent contradictions and how apparent contradictions arise, and you can't understand analogy. Right? There's small mistakes in the beginning wind up leading to big mistakes at the end.